And greetings, friends. Today I want to talk to you about Matthew, the 10th chapter, verse 28, that says this: "Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him," that's God, "which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." And of course, a lot of people take this to mean that this is proof that we have an immortal soul, and that when the wicked die, they go into a place called hell, where they suffer forever and ever and ever in a place called hell. Is that true? Is that what the Scripture's telling us? You know, I keep saying in these Bible misconception programs, we have to stop interpreting the Scriptures with pagan philosophies and pagan ideas. And we have to stop looking at the Scriptures with Greek dualism, which is the belief that we are in this body. We have this body, and in this body there is an immortal soul just trying to get out, and when we die, that immortal soul goes wafting off into heaven or hell. That is a pagan concept, and it's foreign to the Scriptures. The belief of the immortal soul is foreign to the Scriptures. Instead, the Bible plainly says that the soul can die. Ezekiel, the 18th chapter, it says, "The soul that sinneth, that's the soul, will die." And this belief about immortality, inherent within us, foreign to the Scriptures. In 1 Corinthians 15th chapter, verses 50 to 52, it plainly says that at the second coming of Jesus Christ, we must put on immortality. It's not something that's inherent within you, but we must put it on, and that happens at the second coming of Jesus Christ. And in 1 Timothy 6:16, it plainly says that Christ alone has immortality. So there's no immortal soul inside of us trying to get out. That is a pagan idea, a pagan concept. What does this word soul mean? In Matthew, the 10th chapter, verse 28, the word soul here in the Greek is psyche, and the Hebrew equivalent is nephesh. And we read in the Old Testament scriptures that the nephesh is composed of different parts that are put together that comprise the whole soul, or the whole person. We see the inner part of the soul, and then we see the outer part of the soul, as the scriptures show us here. From Immortality or Resurrection, page 49, Bacciocchi says this: "One example of one of the texts quoted by Pedersen is Deuteronomy, the 19th chapter, verse 11, which in the RSV reads, 'But if any man hates his neighbor, and lies in wait for him, and attacks him, and wounds him mortally, so that he dies,'" the phrase "wounds him mortally" in the Hebrew reads, "wounds the soul mortally." So obviously that's the flesh, the outer part of the soul. Pedersen quotes the text from the Hebrew Bible and not the English translations. So here we see the outer part of the soul, the flesh, being wounded. But then there's also the inner part of the soul that you read in the Bible. There's so many scriptures here, but if you download our booklet, Is There Life After Death?, these scriptures are all listed, and it shows that the inner part of the soul is the place where there is knowledge, thought, memory, love, joy, delight, bitterness, distress, impatience, mourning, sorrow, hatred, abhorrence, and so on. It's the seat of our emotions, the heart of man, and that heart of man is the spirit in man, the mind of man. That's the inner part of the soul. And you read the definition here of nephesh from Brown, Driver, and Briggs. It says here, nephesh is soul, self, life, creature, person, appetite, mind, living being. And we read in Genesis, the 2nd chapter, verse 7, where it says man became a living soul. It doesn't say that God put a soul in man. It says man became a living soul, or as it should read, a living being. And of course, the more modern translations translate it living being, or it could also say living creature. So there's mind, living being, desire, emotion, passion. Of course, that takes place in the mind. The inner being of man, living being with life in the blood. Obviously, the outer part of the soul, the flesh. The man himself, self, person, or individual, seat of emotions and passions, activity of mind. So that takes place in the inner part of the soul, what the Bible calls the spirit in man. In Job, the 32nd chapter, verse 8, it says that there is a spirit in man where all his knowledge resides. Of course, obviously, that is the mind of man. And the Apostle Paul said the same thing in 1 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, verse 11. It says, "For what man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of man, which is in him? The knowledge of man resides in the spirit of man, which is the mind of man." So here we see the inner part of the soul, that, of course, is the mind of man. Then we have the outer part of the soul, which is, of course, the body. So this is the meaning of the word soul. It means a living being, and it has components that work in unison together. We have the breath of life, the flesh and blood, and we have the spirit inside of man, the mind of man. They work together in unison. And these different parts put together is the soul, or the whole person, the individual, the living being. And that is what a soul is. Now, Jesus used the word psyche, which is the Greek equivalent, and it basically says the same thing from Thayers. The word psyche is breath of life, a living being, a living soul, seat of the feelings, desires, affections, our heart, soul, the soul as an essence which differs from the body and is not dissolved by death, distinguished from other parts of the body. That's the spirit, the mind of man, which Jesus Christ of Nazareth plainly said in Luke the 12th chapter, verses 4 and 5, that man can kill the body, but that's all they can do. They cannot kill, as he says here, the psyche, the soul, the inner part of man, the spirit in man, because the spirit in man is spiritual, and man can only handle the material and not the spiritual. That's up to God. And this is why Jesus Christ of Nazareth said here to fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. All right, now that we understand what is the soul, that the soul is a living being, a creature, a person, and that there's different components that make up the entire person, the entire soul. There's the spirit in man, which is the mind of man. There is the breath of life, and then there's the flesh and blood. And then there's the inner part of the soul where the spirit of man resides. Then there's the outer part of the soul, which is, of course, the body. Now, understanding this, we can understand what Jesus Christ is, we can interpret correctly what Jesus Christ is saying here in Matthew the 10th chapter, verse 28, where it says, "Fear not them which kill the body." The Greek word is soma. And when you look at the Greek to Hebrew dictionary of Septuagint words, the Hebrew equivalent to soma is nephesh, the soul. So obviously he's talking about the outer part of the soul. "Fear not them which kill the body," the outer part of the soul, "but are not able to kill the soul," the psyche, the inner part of the soul, where the spirit of man resides. Man cannot kill that part of the person. Only God can do it, because that is spiritual. And only God can deal with the spiritual. Man only deals with the material. So they're not able to kill the inner part of the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy. Notice, destroy. The soul doesn't live forever. God can destroy it. So there is no immortal soul in the Bible. But it says, which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Now, most commentaries will tell you that Jesus Christ is quoting from Isaiah, the 10th chapter, verse 18. And he's quoting from the Septuagint version of the Bible, which is, of course, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Now, in the King James, it says this in Isaiah, the 10th chapter, verse 18. "And shall consume the glory of his forest, and of his fruitful field, both soul and body." And this is what Jesus quotes. Now, this scripture is talking about the fate of the wicked. It's speaking of the Assyrian that puts Israel in slavery and captivity at the second coming of Christ. And this is obviously the beast. It's obvious that this is the beast of prophecy that we read of in Revelation, the 20th chapter, verse 10. The beast is thrown into the lake of fire and, of course, is consumed. So obviously it's talking about the fate of the wicked. Jesus Christ is talking here about the fate of the wicked. And it says here both soul and body. Now, that's the Septuagint version of the Bible that Jesus is quoting from. But when you look at the original Hebrew, it reads this way. And this is from Barnes' Notes. It says, in the Hebrew, "From the soul to the flesh," that is entirely, meaning the whole person is going to be consumed, the entire man. The Douay-Rheims Bible translates it this way: "And the glory of his forest and of his beautiful hill shall be consumed from the soul even to the flesh." So obviously it's talking about the inner part of the soul to the outer part of the soul, the flesh. Now notice what Whedon's commentary states. It says here, literally from the soul even to the flesh, beginning at the vitals and working to the outer frame. So obviously when he's saying from the soul, it's talking about the inner part of the soul, where the spirit of man resides, even to the flesh, to the outer part, to the outer part of the soul, the body. So obviously there's the inner part of the soul, the outer part of the soul, and this is how the wicked are going to be consumed. So what Jesus is basically saying here is that we shouldn't fear man, because all man can do is destroy the body, and that's it. That's all he can do. Instead, we should fear God, because God can destroy not just the outer part of the soul, the body, but the inner part of the soul as well, where the spirit of man resides. And this phrase, from the soul even to the flesh, Barnes notes, says that this phrase means the totality of anything, the entire man. This is what this phrase means. And so God can destroy the entire man, the inner part of the soul as well as the outer part of the soul. And if you notice, it says that God can destroy the soul. In Isaiah the 10th chapter, the soul is consumed. So obviously there is no immortal soul, that the soul can die. So Jesus is basically saying here that the inner part of the soul can only be destroyed by God, and that it's temporal, it's not eternal. And Jesus plainly says here that it is destroyed or consumed in the lake of fire. It says here hell, and it should read Gehenna. It's not a place underneath our feet somewhere where the devil resides. That's a pagan concept. It should read here Gehenna, the valley of Hinnom, where there is the lake of fire, and the wicked shall be consumed. The entire man, the entire soul is consumed from the inside out, from the soul, the inner part of the soul, even to the flesh, the outer part of the soul, and they are burnt up and they become ash, as it says in Malachi, the 4th chapter. So this scripture does not prove that there is an immortal soul. It proves that the wicked are burnt up, they are consumed in a place called Gehenna, the lake of fire, and they cease to exist. They don't exist any longer. As it says in Romans the 6th chapter, verse 23, the wages of sin is death, permanent death, where there is no resurrection, and the wicked don't exist any longer. So to say that this scripture proves that when the wicked die, they suffer forever in a place called hell is just another Bible misconception.